The Underwater City. Part 1, the dive begins. Amelia had always been curious about the ocean. From her little house near the shore, she often dreamed about what might be hiding far below the waves. One day, she decided to find out. She had built a small underwater boat, just big enough for one person, and today was the day she would take it deep into the ocean. Her boat, called the Sea Whisperer, had a thick glass dome at the front so she could see everything around her. Inside, there were a few simple controls and a soft seat where she could sit during her adventure. It wasn't fancy, but it was enough for Amelia. The morning was calm and bright. The sunlight sparkled on the water as she carefully lowered her boat into the sea. Amelia climbed inside, her heart beating with excitement. She pressed a few buttons, and the little boat started to sink gently into the water. At first, everything looked normal. She could see schools of fish darting back and forth, their scales shining in the sunlight. Brightly colored coral grew along the rocky seabed, and seaweed waved gently in the current. "This is amazing," Amelia whispered to herself. As the boat went deeper, the sunlight faded, the water grew darker and cooler. Amelia turned on the boat's lights, and two bright beams lit up the water in front of her. Strange and wonderful creatures swam into view. Jellyfish that glowed softly, tiny fish with lights on their bellies, and long, twisting eels that slithered through the shadows. Amelia was amazed. She had read about creatures like these in books, but seeing them in real life was something else entirely. She slowed the boat, watching as the glowing animals swam all around her. It felt like she was floating in a dream. Then, just as she was about to move on, something caught her eye. Far below, there was a faint light. It wasn't like the lights of the jellyfish or the fish. This light stayed still, glowing softly in one place. It seemed to be coming from deep within a trench, a dark crack in the seabed that stretched down into the unknown. What could that be? Amelia wondered aloud. Amelia's heart beat faster as she guided her boat toward the trench. The light grew brighter as she got closer, shining in soft shades of blue and green. She leaned forward in her seat, trying to see where it was coming from. The trench was deep and dark, but the glow lit up its walls. Strange plants with glowing tips grew along the edges, swaying in the gentle current. Amelia felt both excited and nervous. This was unlike anything she had ever seen. "I have to find out what's down there," she said to herself. She adjusted the controls, guiding her boat carefully into the trench. The light surrounded her now, making the dark water feel warm and alive. The deeper she went, the more she felt like she was entering a completely different world. Finally, she saw it, a huge archway carved into the rock at the bottom of the trench. The archway was covered in glowing patterns that pulsed softly, like they were alive. Beyond it, Amelia could see more lights in the distance. "This is incredible," she whispered. She didn't know what was on the other side of the archway, but she knew she had to find out. Part 2, the Hidden Gateway. Amelia's boat hovered in front of the enormous archway. She couldn't take her eyes off it. The carvings on the stone glowed softly, their light shimmering like ripples on the surface of a pond. The patterns looked like spirals, waves, and something that reminded her of stars. It didn't look natural. It seemed like someone or something had made it. "Who could have built this?" Amelia wondered aloud. She leaned forward, peering through the glass dome of her boat. Beyond the archway, the faint blue-green light grew brighter, but the view was still hazy. She felt a mix of excitement and fear. Whatever was on the other side of this gateway, it wasn't something anyone on the surface had ever seen before. Amelia hesitated. Should she turn back and tell someone about what she had found, or should she keep going? Her curiosity quickly won. "I didn't come all this way just to stop here," she said to herself. She adjusted the controls of her boat, moving slowly toward the archway. As she crossed through it, a gentle hum filled the water, like the sound of a low, peaceful song. The carvings on the archway glowed brighter for a moment, then dimmed again as she passed through. On the other side, the water was filled with light. Amelia gasped softly as her boat floated into a vast underwater canyon. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. Massive coral towers rose from the seabed, their surfaces glowing with soft, colorful lights, pinks, blues, greens, and golds. The towers stretched so high that their tops disappeared into the hazy water above. Between them, smaller coral structures created winding streets and open spaces that looked like plazas. Schools of fish swam gracefully between the coral towers, their scales shimmering as they moved. Some of the fish glowed like lanterns, leaving trails of light behind them. Others were covered in patterns that looked like tiny stars. As Amelia steered her boat deeper into the canyon, she saw more wonders. Giant sea plants, with leaves as big as sails, swayed gently in the currents. Jellyfish floated by in slow, hypnotic movements, their tentacles trailing sparkling threads. The light from the coral towers reflected off the water, creating a soft, magical glow that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "It's a city," Amelia said softly, her voice filled with awe. "An underwater city." Amelia's heart raced as she guided her boat closer to one of the coral towers. She noticed something moving near its base, something large. At first, she thought it might be a fish, but as she got closer, she realized it was something entirely different. A figure floated near the coral, its movements slow and graceful. It wasn't a fish or a person, it was something in between. Its body shimmered like a pearl, reflecting the light from the coral. It had arms and a head like a person, but its lower half tapered into a long, flowing tail, like a sea creature. Amelia understood it as an invitation. "You want me to come closer?" she asked, even though she knew the figure couldn't hear her. With a deep breath, she adjusted her controls and moved the boat closer to the base of the tower. As she approached, the figure swam gracefully upward, circling the coral like a ribbon in the water. Amelia watched in amazement. The being moved as if the water was part of it, every motion smooth and effortless. As the figure reached the top of the coral, it touched a glowing spot near the tower's surface. A circular opening appeared, revealing a tunnel that seemed to lead inside. Amelia hesitated. Should she follow? The figure floated at the entrance, looking back at her expectantly. "I guess that's a yes," Amelia said, steering her boat toward the opening. The tunnel was wide enough for her boat to fit through, and as she entered, she noticed the walls were covered in glowing patterns, similar to the ones on the archway. The light inside the tunnel was soft and golden, casting a warm glow on everything around her. The figure led her through the tunnel, swimming just ahead of her boat. After a short distance, the tunnel opened into a large chamber. Amelia's jaw dropped. The chamber was breathtaking. The walls were made of glowing crystal, and the floor was covered in smooth sand that sparkled like tiny diamonds. In the center of the room was a large glowing orb that seemed to pulse with light like a beating heart. Around the orb, more of the shimmering figures floated, each one carrying what looked like small, glowing stones. Amelia's boat came to a gentle stop. She felt like she was intruding on something important, but the figures didn't seem upset. In fact, they turned toward her with calm, curious expressions. One of them swam closer, holding out one of the glowing stones. The figure placed the stone against the glass of Amelia's boat, and something incredible happened. The stone began to glow more brightly, and patterns of light danced across its surface. Amelia stared, mesmerized, as the patterns began to form images. The images told a story. They showed the city as it had been long ago, full of light and life. The coral towers were brighter, the water was clear, and the fish swam freely. But then, dark clouds began to creep into the images. The water grew murky, and the coral lost its glow. The figures in the images seemed worried, working hard to keep the city alive. Amelia understood. The pollution from the surface was affecting this magical place, dimming its light and harming its balance. She felt a pang of guilt. Could people on the surface be causing this without even knowing it? The figure gently tapped the stone against the glass again, and the images disappeared. It looked at Amelia with a calm but serious expression, as if to ask, "Will you help?" Amelia nodded. "Yes," she said softly, "I'll help." Part 3: The City Revealed. Amelia sat quietly in her boat, looking at the glowing figures around her. They were peaceful and calm, but there was something serious in their glowing eyes. The pictures they had shown her were still fresh in her mind. The pollution was hurting this beautiful place. It felt wrong, and Amelia wanted to help. The figure that had shared the glowing images swam closer again. It pointed toward the glowing orb in the center of the room. The orb pulsed gently, like it was alive. Amelia stared at it, wondering what it could be. The figure touched the orb lightly, and its glow brightened. The other figures gathered around, and they began to hum softly. The sound was like a gentle song, low and calming. Amelia could feel it through the walls of her boat. As the orb glowed brighter, the room lit up, and Amelia saw more of the city through her boat's glass dome. She gasped softly. The coral towers stretched far and wide, their soft lights shimmering in the dark water. Tiny glowing fish swam between the buildings, and the sea plants waved gently in the current. The city looked alive, but it wasn't as bright as it could be. Some parts of the coral had dark spots, and the water wasn't as clear as it was near the orb. It was like the city was losing its strength. "This must be the heart of the city," Amelia whispered to herself, looking at the glowing orb. "It keeps everything alive." The figure tapped on her boat gently, pulling her attention back. It pointed toward one of the darker parts of the city, far away from the orb's light. Amelia nodded, understanding the figure's message. She guided her boat out of the glowing chamber, following the figure through the city. As they moved away from the orb, the water grew darker and less clear. The coral here didn't glow as brightly, and some parts of it looked damaged. Black streaks stained the colorful coral, and fewer fish swam nearby. "It's the pollution," Amelia said softly, her voice heavy with sadness. "It's spreading here from the surface." The figure turned to her, its glowing eyes filled with worry. It pointed to the coral and then to Amelia's boat, as if asking her to help. Amelia took a deep breath. "I'll try," she said, her voice steady. Amelia checked the controls of her boat. She had brought tools with her for exploring underwater, but she wasn't sure if they could fix coral or clean water. Still, she had to try. Her boat had a small robotic arm for picking up samples. She guided the arm carefully toward a patch of dark, damaged coral. Using a soft brush attached to the arm, she gently cleaned away some of the black marks. It wasn't perfect, but the coral looked a little brighter. The glowing figure watched closely, then swam forward to help. It touched the coral with its hands, and a soft light spread from its fingers. The coral glowed brighter, as if it was healing. "You can fix it," Amelia said, smiling. "We can work together." For the next few hours, Amelia and the glowing figure worked side by side. Amelia used her boat's tools to clean the coral and remove bits of trash that had floated into the city. The figure used its glowing light to heal the coral and bring back its brightness. Other figures joined them, helping to carry away debris and guide fish back to their homes. Amelia was amazed by how the figures worked together. They didn't speak with words, but their movements and glowing lights were perfectly in sync. It was like they shared one mind, always knowing what to do next. Slowly, the darker parts of the city began to look brighter. The coral regained its color, and the water became clearer. Fish started to return, their glowing scales lighting up the area. Amelia felt a warm glow in her chest. She was tired, but she didn't want to stop. Helping this magical city felt like the most important thing she had ever done. As the coral around them began to glow fully again, the figures stopped and turned to Amelia. One of them placed its glowing hands on her boat, and she felt a gentle hum like a thank you. Amelia leaned back in her seat, smiling. "We've made a good start," she said, her voice soft, "but there's still more to do." The figures looked at each other, then at the coral tower in the distance. The light from the heart of the city was brighter now, as if it was stronger because of what they had done. Amelia felt a deep connection to the city and its glowing inhabitants. She wanted to stay longer, to help even more. But she also knew she had to return to the surface. The people above needed to know about this place. If the pollution didn't stop, the city would be in danger again. Part 4, Helping the City. Amelia sat in her small boat, looking at the glowing city around her. The coral was brighter now, and the water was starting to look clearer. The glowing figures floated nearby, their eyes calm but still a little worried. Amelia knew there was more to do. She pressed a few buttons on her boat, checking her tools again. "What else can I help with?" she wondered aloud. As Amelia moved closer, she saw what was causing the problem. Bits of trash and waste from the surface had gathered in this part of the city. Plastic bags floated in the water, tangled in the coral. Empty bottles and cans were stuck in the sand. A long fishing net had wrapped around one of the towers, pulling it down. Amelia's heart sank. "This is so wrong," she said softly. "How can people let this happen?" The glowing figures floated around the trash, trying to clean it with their hands, but they couldn't remove it all. The fishing net was too heavy, and the plastic bags clung tightly to the coral. Amelia tightened her grip on the controls of her boat. "Don't worry," she said firmly. "I'll help." Amelia started with the fishing net. She carefully guided her boat closer to the tower, using its robotic arm to grab the net. The net was heavy, and it took all her strength to pull it loose. As the net came free, the coral tower stood straight again, its soft glow returning. The glowing figures swam around her, their eyes lighting up with thanks. One of them touched the tower with its glowing hands, and the coral's color became even brighter. Next, Amelia turned to the plastic bags. She used the arm of her boat to gently pull them off the coral. Some of the bags tore, and little pieces floated away, but the glowing figures quickly gathered the bits and carried them to a safe place. The bottles and cans were easier to pick up. Amelia collected them in a small storage compartment on her boat. "I'll take these back to the surface," she said. "They don't belong here." Once the trash was gone, Amelia and the glowing figures worked together to heal the coral. Amelia used her brush tool to clean away dirt and grime, while the figures touched the coral with their glowing hands, filling it with light and life. It was slow, careful work, but Amelia didn't mind. She felt happy knowing she was making a difference. The coral started to glow again, soft and beautiful, just like the rest of the city. The fish returned too. Tiny glowing fish swam in and out of the coral, their scales sparkling like little stars. Larger fish with colorful patterns glided by, curious about the new life in their home. When the work was done, Amelia leaned back in her seat, tired but happy. She looked at the glowing figures around her. They floated calmly, their soft lights brighter now. One of them swam close to her boat and touched the glass dome gently. It tilted its head, as if to say, "Thank you." Amelia smiled. "I'm glad I could help," she said softly. The figures began to hum again, a low, peaceful sound that filled the water. Amelia closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over her. It felt like the city itself was thanking her. Amelia looked out at the city. It was beautiful, glowing softly in the dark water. But she knew it was still fragile. The pollution from the surface had already done so much damage, and it could happen again. "I need to tell people about this place," she said. "They need to know how special it is and how much we're hurting it." Amelia felt a warmth in her chest. The city wasn't just alive, it was hopeful. Part 5, A Festival of Light. Amelia stayed in her boat, watching the glowing figures as they gathered near the heart of the city. The tall coral towers now shone brightly, their soft colors lighting up the dark water. It felt peaceful, but also full of energy, like something exciting was about to happen. The glowing figure that had been helping her swam closer. It pointed toward the heart of the city, the glowing orb she had seen earlier. Amelia adjusted her controls and followed. As her boat moved through the clear water, more figures joined them, their soft hums filling the water with a gentle sound. "What's happening?" Amelia wondered aloud. She wasn't afraid. Whatever the figures were leading her to, it felt calm and welcoming. When they reached the heart of the city, Amelia saw that the glowing orb had changed. It was brighter now, pulsing gently with light. Around it, the figures floated in a circle, their lights flickering softly, like stars in the night sky. Then, one by one, the figures began to glow brighter. Their light spread outward, coloring the water in shades of blue, green, pink, and gold. The coral towers shimmered as the light touched them, their surfaces sparkling like jewels. Amelia stared in awe. The city looked alive, more than ever before. The light flowed through the streets and plazas, making the entire place shine like a dream. As the figures glowed, their soft hums grew louder, turning into a song. The sound was unlike anything Amelia had ever heard. It was smooth and flowing, like the sound of waves, but also gentle and high, like the wind through trees. The music filled the water, wrapping around Amelia like a warm hug. The glowing figures danced in the water, their movements slow and graceful. Schools of fish joined them, their scales reflecting the colorful lights. Even the plants swayed gently, as if they were part of the music. Amelia couldn't help but smile. "It's a celebration," she whispered. "They're celebrating the city's light coming back." The figure that had been helping her swam closer to her boat and motioned for her to come out. Amelia hesitated. She had stayed in her boat the whole time, but now she felt like she was being invited to be part of the celebration. Carefully, she opened the hatch and stepped out into the water. She wore her diving suit, which let her breathe underwater, but she could still feel the coolness of the water and the gentle currents around her. The figure took her hand, its light soft and warm, and guided her toward the glowing orb. Amelia floated next to it, feeling its gentle pulse. She placed her hand on its surface, and a wave of warmth spread through her. Images flashed in her mind. Images of the city when it was bright and healthy, and images of its struggle to stay alive. Amelia nodded. "I understand now," she said softly. "The city needs us to protect it." The orb pulsed again, and the glowing figures let out a soft, harmonious sound. It felt like a promise to work together to keep the city alive. As the celebration continued, Amelia knew it was almost time for her to leave. She felt deeply connected to the city and its glowing inhabitants, but she also knew she had a responsibility to the surface world. One of the glowing figures swam to her and handed her a small, glowing stone. Amelia held it carefully in her hands. It was warm and pulsed faintly, just like the heart of the city. The figure motioned to her boat, and Amelia understood. The stone was a gift, a piece of the city to remind her of its beauty and its need for protection. "Thank you," Amelia said, her voice full of emotion. "I'll never forget this." The glowing figures gathered around her one last time, their lights flickering softly like a farewell. As Amelia climbed back into her boat, she felt a sense of peace. The city was alive and hopeful, and she had been a part of its healing. Amelia guided her boat slowly out of the city, looking back at the glowing towers and the dancing lights. The figures waved gently as she passed through the archway, their soft hums fading into the distance. As she ascended toward the surface, the water grew darker and colder. The sunlight above was faint, but Amelia felt a warmth in her chest from the glowing stone she held. It was more than a keepsake. It was a reminder of her promise to protect the ocean. When her boat broke the surface, the world above felt different. The waves sparkled in the sunlight, and the air was fresh and cool. Amelia looked out at the endless sea, feeling a deep sense of purpose. "The city is alive," she whispered, "and I'll make sure it stays that way." Part 6, A New Purpose. Amelia's boat floated gently on the surface of the ocean. She looked around, her hand resting on the glowing stone in her lap. The sunlight sparkled on the waves, and the air felt warm and peaceful. But Amelia's mind was filled with thoughts of the city below. The glowing coral towers, the gentle figures, the soft music, they were all so beautiful. But she also remembered the pollution, the dark patches in the water, and the trash that had hurt the coral. The city had been in danger, and she had seen how hard the glowing figures worked to protect it. "They can't do it alone," she said to herself softly. "People on the surface need to help too." Amelia turned her boat toward the shore. As she moved through the water, she thought about what she had seen. She thought about the glowing figures, the colorful coral, and the pulsing light of the city's heart. She also thought about the trash she had collected, plastic bags, bottles, and fishing nets that didn't belong in the ocean. When she reached the dock, she tied up her boat and climbed out carefully, still holding the glowing stone. She placed the trash she had collected in a bin nearby. It's a small start, she thought, but every bit helps. Amelia sat on the dock for a moment, looking out at the sea. The glowing stone in her hands pulsed gently, like it was alive. It reminded her of the glowing orb at the heart of the city. She smiled. "I'll keep this safe," she said softly. "It will remind me of the promise I made." Amelia knew she couldn't keep the underwater city a secret. People needed to know how special it was and how much danger it was in. That night, she sat by her desk and began writing. She wrote about the glowing coral towers, the peaceful figures, and the music that filled the water. She wrote about the pollution she had seen and how it had hurt the city. Most of all, she wrote about how important it was to keep the ocean clean and safe. This is what people need to hear, she thought. If they know how beautiful the ocean is, maybe they'll want to protect it. She shared her story with friends, neighbors, and anyone who would listen. At first, some people didn't believe her. "A glowing city under the water?" they said, laughing. "That sounds like a fairy tale." But Amelia didn't give up. She showed them the glowing stone, and they couldn't deny its soft, magical light. Slowly, people started to believe her. They listened to her story, and many of them promised to help keep the ocean clean. Over the next few weeks, Amelia worked hard. She joined groups that cleaned up the beach and helped spread the message about protecting the ocean. She taught children about the animals that lived in the water and how trash could hurt them. She also returned to the sea often in her boat. She never saw the glowing figures again, but she always carried the glowing stone with her. It felt like a small piece of the city, always reminding her of what she had seen. Whenever she looked at the water, she thought about the glowing city far below. She thought about the gentle figures in their beautiful, peaceful world, and she thought about her promise to protect it. One evening, as the sun set over the ocean, Amelia stood on the shore with the glowing stone in her hand. The sky turned orange and pink, and the waves lapped softly at her feet. She smiled, thinking about how much she had learned. The underwater city was a magical place, but it was also fragile. It needed care and protection, just like the rest of the ocean. Amelia felt proud knowing she was doing her part. Looking out at the endless water, she whispered softly, "I'll never forget you, and I'll keep working to protect the ocean, for you and for everything that lives here." As the stars began to twinkle in the sky, the glowing stone in her hand pulsed gently, as if answering her promise.